I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it one time for all three. No problem. Okay, take it away.
So I would like to call the Historic Review Board meeting for May 23rd, 2017 to order. And the first item on the agenda, our previous chair had his term expired. So the first item on the agenda is to select a new chair for the time being. And
I move that Ken Basinger be the chair.
Just to clarify, this would be the chair just for tonight's
just
hearing.
for tonight's
Excuse me, for tonight.
Second. So I'll do roll here quickly. Board member Matt.
Aye.
Board member Blythe.
Aye.
And board member Basinger.
Aye.
Okay, perfect. Motion passes. And on to next item.
All right. First, I want to thank everybody for coming here and let you know that we are under some time pressure tonight because one of our board members cannot stay past 7:30. So we're going to try to keep moving forward and get as much done as we can. So the public comments in general, not specific to anything. I don't have any comment forms except those that are specific to items on the agenda. And I don't see anyone raising hands. So we'll move to the first item on the agenda, which is the public hearing. And before we do that, we need to read the rules regarding public meetings.
Thank you, Acting Chair Basinger. I have to read the quasi-judicial hearing script, and what I'm going to do, because we have 3 public hearings, I'm going to read the script for all 3. So it's going to cover all 3, and then we'll do the ex parte disclosures for that matter when we get to it, but I'm just going to do the initial disclosures. We have 3 public hearings and land use applications scheduled for tonight. A staff report has been prepared for each application and has been made available to the public 7 days before the first public hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. Staff has analyzed the criteria which are contained in the staff report. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure that the Commission will follow is set out in state law and the Oregon City Municipal Code. The hearing procedure steps are shown in the chart over there. Anyone wishing to speak should fill out a speaker's card and give it to the planning staff before the hearing. Speakers will proceed in the order in which their card is received. You should fill out your address on the card so the city will notify you of its final decision. For the public record, please begin all testimony stating your name. Testimony and evidence should be directed toward the applicable approval criteria. If you believe other criteria apply in addition to those addressed in the staff report, identify and discuss those criteria and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. A person may submit any written material while the public record is open on each application. Any written materials received by city staff during the time period in which the record is open will be placed in the record. Written materials submitted during the public hearing must be presented to city staff in order to become a part of the record. If the the Historic Review Board makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue that you may wish to appeal must have been raised for the consideration of the City Commission or LUBA or both without raising the issue on the record with sufficient specificity and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond. The issue will not be deemed appealable to the State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. So now we will open the hearing for Oregon City file number PC 1706 HR 1704 Historic Review Board request to review Phase 1 of proposed Public Works Operations Facility. Does any board member have any ex parte contacts, conflict of interest, bias, or any other statement to declare?
No. None.
No.
Have any commissioners visit or board members visited the site? All three raised their hand for the record.
Yes.
You want to? Let's go down the line real quick. And any commissioner want to declare what they perceived in visiting the site? When did you visit it, and what did you see?
I've visited it many times, and most recently this morning.
Okay.
And there was
You
nothing.
just walked around, and it was a beautiful day.
You got it.
I visited it maybe 3 times, and the last one was again today, just to familiarize and see if there's any change.
I visited on Sunday and observed the condition of the site and the buildings as they are now.
Does anyone in the audience wish to question any of the board members about these disclosures? All right, we'll now move forward with the planning staff report. Mr. Martin.
Okay. So I am going to more or less keep it kind of brief here. So this is and I do apologize, that light will not dim, and they're still working out some computer kinks, so if it's a little small, I do apologize for that. So with this is the new public works operations facility on Center Street. Just to cover some things here. I'm sorry. So we're talking this. So what you see on the projector in front of you is the site and what the proposed application is looking at creating on the site in the future. So we're looking at a new office building, a new truck shed, a new tool shed, and for the Armory to remain. Let me preface this that this application is looking at the design standards only of the historic, of the new construction in the historic guidelines. This is not looking at the zoning use and the use of the site. It's looking at the design guidelines and how they apply to the proposed buildings. Here's the site plan and what they proposed. The office would be right here, the tool shed here, truck shed here, and leaving the existing armory right here. Brief elevation of the proposed office building as viewed from Center Street. So here would be Center Street, looking up towards the site in question. Here are the designs for the proposed office building. We discussed these. The applicant submitted a pretty detailed narrative of what they're proposing to do, how the items that they're proposing to do fit the vernacular style of the design guidelines for new construction. Again, a different elevation of the office building. Some more renderings of the proposed color schemes. Again, looking at the office from the bluff, and then looking at the proposed office building from the parking lot. Some more design items and where they used inspiration for the proposed buildings, what buildings they looked at in the McLaughlin Conservation District, and how they incorporated them into the proposed design. Looking at, again, the proposed design and some more vernacular elements. This one in particular addressing the human scale of the design, illustrating that windows are at the pedestrian level, and again highlighting some of the materials that are being used in the application. Details of the tool shed, which would be if you're looking at it from Center Street, it'd be off to the left-hand side. And the materials that will be used. The elevator that's going to be incorporated into the design, this will be taking visitors from the lower yard to the upper yard, so from the ground up to that proposed office building. And let's see if I can go back here quickly and just give you a quick example of what that looked like. The elevator was right here. You can see my mouse. This is the truck shed that's proposed, which would be tucked back behind the proposed office building out of the public right-of-way, out of view of the public right-of-way. And the existing armory to basically remain the same. Some items will change, such as extra garage doors and then refinishing of the building. And then submitted material samples, which I have up here, and I believe I showed everybody last time. And that's mostly it for me.
There are some seats up front here if you want to, unless you want to stand up. We have extra seats here, but nobody wants them.
And there's one next to Joyce, too. Tom, there's one next to Joyce. There's. Oh.
Okay, is the applicant here?
Chair Basinger will be timing all of the applicant and all the speakers with these as well.
Okay.
So good evening. My name is Martin Montalvo. I'm the operations manager for Oregon City Public Works, 122 South Center Street. I'm the project manager for the operations plan update, or operations master plan update. Just to give you a little background, first slide. So this is an overall site view of our proposed master plan update. The significant changes from the already approved 2010 master plan is that we've one of the significant concerns we heard during the initial plan was truck traffic in the upper yard versus the lower yard. So we flip-flop that to keep truck traffic where it's currently located in the lower yard. That means the administrative building is now located in the upper yard. The administrative building was designed to accommodate our 20-year growth pattern for the department and to accommodate beyond that with some of the design changes that we've made within the facility. It allows us to expand without actually having to add on to the building. It also accommodates our fleet requirements by taking the existing Armory building, as Trevor's mentioned, and remodeling that. Service tank, so it should be able to handle our trucks and a few other items. There's an equipment and tool storage facility that you see there almost center of the page, which allows us to store and keep the city's equipment and materials that we use for the day-to-day operations. The concept with that is the interior be in line with Home Depot. Rather than going horizontal, we go vertical with storing our needs and then being able to just drive our trucks in and out one directionally through the facility and load up the equipment that we need. You'll see a large parking area that's covered. Portions of it are covered and insulated. Portions of it are just covered. And then there's also a washing area for the vehicles. You'll see there's a large yellow square down there at the bottom, and that's for future expansion to accommodate into, again, beyond our 20-year plan. It's not something we intend to construct with Phase 1, but it's something that we're noting within the master plan. With me today is David Hyman. He's the architect for the project. I'll let him introduce himself, and then we'll move on to a few other slides.
David Hyman, principal with DECA Architecture, 935 Southeast Alder Street in Portland, working on the master plan. What we're applying for is both an amendment to the general development plan, and then for Phase 1, a detailed development plan. So really all we're focusing on for this review is the upper site, which is primarily the Phase 1.
So
This is, again, a comparison of the original 2009-2010 master plan. It's much more intensive. The overall reduction in scale from the approved plan to our existing plan is a 25% reduction in overall square footage for the entire site plan. And again, it's still accommodating the department's long-term needs, and it's accommodating several of the concerns that were brought up with the original master plan. Next slide.
So this shows the phasing. As I said, the amendment to the general development plan includes all three phases, but really the phase one is primarily the upper site, with one portion of it is phase three. The upper site includes the buildings that were already mentioned and the parking, that we're adding parking on the upper site. Mainly what we're doing is we're shifting all of the large trucks that are staying on the lower site. We're shifting most of the office functions to the upper site, which is different from the original 2009 master plan, one of the major differences.
So the only thing that I'll mention about this slide is that while we're only presenting the phase one for this evening, the design concepts that we're trying to do for the entire design are uniform and consistent with one another, so that one won't stick out from a different phase.
And this is the floor plan, first floor plan of the office building. As you can see, it includes conference rooms, break rooms, reception, operations manager, and locker rooms, men and women's locker rooms on the right side. On the upper level are studio offices for the various divisions. You can go to the next slide. So we have groupings of division leaders and supervisors along with staff, and there's groups there's kind of these studio clusters for all of those divisions. And one large conference room on the upper side. This is the tool storage building that has 3 bays for trucks to pull in and out. Again, they're all in a forward motion. And then in between are restrooms and an office and some mezzanine storage above. This is a renovation of the Armory building. This will become the fleet shop. Originally, in the original 2009, that was a whole separate building. We've been able to preserve the Armory and convert that to it. It has a lot of characteristics of high bays that allow that to happen and save money at the same time. This is the lower site. This is phase 2, so I won't dwell on that too much. But that shows truck parking that pulls through to Center Street. So it's again one-way truck parking, pulling in and then pulling out onto Center Street. Same thing on the other side. This is the other half of that. This is the office building, 2-story office building on the upper site. I can show in the future slides what the relationship is to the historic review guidelines, but the materials are all similar on all of these buildings, including the lower site. We didn't have to show the level of detail on the lower site that we did in the application, but we wanted to show compatibility, and we wanted to show that how it addressed the street on Center Street, so that as you looked from Center Street to the bluff and above, you could see all of those buildings together. And this is, you can keep going. We have a better view than that. Yeah, actually, that's a different presentation. Yeah. Section cut through the site, so you can kind of see from the grade change between the upper and lower site. The building, the office building on the upper site is set back 47 feet from the bluff, so it actually is fairly nestled in as you're looking at it from the Center Street looking up. With the landscape that's going to be in front of it, it's actually fairly unobtrusive view. I just want to mention one thing too, that just to clarify that if you could go back for just 1 second, just to clarify that the elevator is for staff only. It's not a public elevator. It's to unify the two sites so that the staff doesn't have to get into a vehicle and go up to the upper side or down to the lower side.
So I'm going to stop here for a second, Trevor. We had the wrong presentation, and while most of the elements are correct, the few slides that I think we should touch on are actually, if you'll bring up your presentation that you had earlier, we can speak to the architectural elements in that. Sure.
there. So that's this is the most descriptive slide that shows the kinds of elements that we incorporated into the buildings to comply with the design guidelines. The two buildings that you see on the bottom, the more historic ones, are actually in the design guidelines for Oregon City. They're examples of the kinds of things that they would like to see in historic districts. And you'll see that the major elements are things like cornices, parapets, the base, middle, and top, kind of a tripartite building, large storefront windows. They talk about verticality and vertical windows and windows of pedestrian scale on the ground level. And so we have incorporated all of those elements in the design of these buildings. You'll see that on the ground floor we've used a more durable material of a ground-faced CMU, which is a ground-faced concrete block in warm tones. We have examples of it there that you can see, combined with two types of metal panel contrasting that help to divide those layers, those divisions of the buildings. We have a strong horizontal band, a belt cornice, and another strong horizontal band at the parapet with a very simple kind of cornice detail above that. So it's got all of those elements, repeating rhythms, historically proportioned windows, but in a more modern kind of interpretation of that. And this is the material itself. As you look a little closer, you can see we're trying to incorporate an ashlar pattern into the CMU. We are incorporating an ashlar pattern into the concrete block. And the metal panel is a variety of textures and spacing to give the building more interest and life. And then a dark band at the bottom to kind of define the base a little bit more. Similar materials on all the buildings. And you'll see the CMU, the concrete block, the warm tones are going to be in all of the buildings, and the metal panel will also be the same in all the buildings. The elevator is going to be also to have the same kind of base, middle, top. It's a slender, much more slender kind of shape than the other buildings, but by dividing it up that way with some horizontal bands, I think it'll be a really elegant kind of connection between the two levels. And then this is in phase 2. This is the lower site, so I won't dwell too much. Oh, sorry. This is the upper yard. This is the parking shed, the truck shed on the upper level. So there'll be a series of bays with roll-up doors and combined. So some of it will be enclosed and tempered space, and then there will be some open but covered truck storage areas on the sides, on the ends. This is the Armory. The Armory is going to be substantially the same, although we are adding some windows on one side and some doors. Those will be not necessarily pull-through kinds of doors, but there'll be larger openings that we can load and unload materials from for storage. There'll be a series of windows for offices on that side of the building as well. So that side will have the most amount of alteration to it. We'll upgrade the roof. We'll upgrade we'll certainly paint the building and upgrade the kind of the color scheme in it and modernize the building. These are pictures of the actual materials. Again, it's a kind of a combination of warm tones in the concrete block and kind of an interesting ashlar pattern in the CMU. It's not on the left. It just shows the pattern. It's not actually showing the color of the block. But the metal panel, that's the kind of metal panel and spacing and texture that we're proposing.
That's it. We'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Questions?
No questions.
No questions. Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Are there additional public comment forms out there? All right. Reading them off in the order that they came in. Jerry Herman. And for the record, please state your name and address.
Thank you. My name is Jerry Herman. I'm here tonight regarding the Public Works facility because I was here 10 years ago to the Planning Commission with some commentary when it was initially being considered in conjunction with the Armory site. I call the lower site on Center Street, and the upper plateau in my commentary that I'm going to read quickly. I have 3 minutes, is that right, roughly? Okay. My whole purpose for being here is, actually it was 8 years ago, I provided commentary about the Armory's position on the plateau and how important it was to the history and development of Oregon City. Many World War II efforts were staged out of Company D at that location. General Rylea used to spend a lot of time coming to Oregon City. General Rylea was a very important Army of the general of the Army. He also associated himself with General MacArthur, and amazingly enough, several thousand people in Oregon City's region mustered out of that facility in World War II, some of which helped both General Rylea and also General MacArthur prevail in World War II in the Pacific, especially in the island hopping. My commentary then was regarding, wouldn't it be nice if we could integrate that facility somehow in the design. I'm going to just paraphrase for time's sake here. You've got the information in front of you. My real reason for being here is I'd love to see something happen constructively where this facility can be built in a manner that meets the needs of the community. The community has had this facility there since 1920 on Center Street, almost a century now, nearly a century. Things have been going on at that location. And staging out of that area on the lower Center Street location apparently has worked. There may be traffic issues that I'm not aware of. I don't claim to be an expert at all in the neighborhood concerns about traffic as it is generated from that site. But I will tell you, as a member of the Natural Resource Committee, and again I'm paraphrasing here, I'm not speaking on their behalf, I was a founding member of that group, we had concerns 4 years ago brought to us, and John Lewis was asked at that time to present his commentary of how they would address certain things, such as this is where the Heritage Tree Ordinance included for once assemblages of trees. Believe it or not, the only tree ordinance in the Northwest region, probably this nation, that includes wooded assemblages, came about because we went down and looked at the site, the plateau site, and found these elevated prominences that were carved out by Ice Age floods, left with very interesting plants, including poison oak. I will not describe to you how bad I felt after going through that thicket with one of your community members, but let me tell you, I felt bad for a long time. But the idea of saving the assemblages of unique plants left from Ice Age floods, that plateau was carved by the Ice Age floods that also carved the other side of the river in West Lynn. We call that Camassia wilderness. It's a very unique setting. We asked John at that time, could you do possibly something to save those assemblages and the carved channels, scour channels that are visible there, and those kinds of things. Could you integrate the Armory where you could, or at least try to save or celebrate the aspects of that cultural history that occurred there? So we didn't know this would go anyplace. But the other question was ingress, egress. It seems really difficult to put all the ingress, egress off of John Adams Street. Could you do something to make the south approach to this facility more viable onto Center Street? Could you buy a house and then figure out a way to ultimately provide a better ingress, egress? John and his people and the design staff that I guess were before you tonight have done that, which really surprised us. So the reason I'm here is that I have another mission. You have a document in front of you, which is my other mission, is that the Ice Age floods also created Oregon's most significant geologic area. I know this because Dr. Scott Burns from Portland State University has talked about this over and over again. I've led a number of workshops up there, up to the top of Wrighton, which is above, at the very top of the prominences on the third level, shall we say, of the city. And his question to me is, why isn't Oregon City doing something to perhaps celebrate in their Public Works Center the integration of Oregon's significant natural area? We will help, he said, make that happen. We will help with the Department of Geology and Mineral Industries, which he's very much involved with. Dr. Burns, by the way, is Professor Emeritus of Geology at Portland State University. So we, the Natural Resource Committee, but most importantly myself, feel that there's an opportunity here to make the public work facility work for the community with whatever considerations you hear about from the community. unless there's an overall attitude they don't want it there. I don't know that that's the case, but I could be wrong. It seems kind of strange that it couldn't be there if all the design considerations were addressed, including the integration of the historic aspects I talked about. Last page of my commentary,
I think that's all
being
the,
real brief.
You've run out of time.
Yes, I am. Okay.
Thank you.
Was that early leaders started at that site? Oregon City's earliest leadership in the region started at Company D. The Public Works staff has seemed to respond effectively to concerns, and ultimately, it'd be really nice to see this
I'm
move
sorry,
forward. if it
I'm
could.
going to have to cut you off
All right, I'm
here
done.
because of
Okay.
that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I'm sorry that one's
was
not working.
looking-
That
so
one's not
I'm going to
working.
put it right here, and it'll work
Okay.
here. For some reason, it's not working at the moment, but
Okay, Amy
I'll-
Wilhite.
we'll work it from here. Sorry about the confusion.
Good evening. I'm Amy Wilhite. I'm a citizen of Oregon City. I first moved here about 50 years ago. Have spent a lot of time on the upper side of Oregon City and using the Waterboard Park and Armory site as a cut through to come down to go to the pool and other things as we were kids. Spent a lot of time there. When I first heard about this project, going back in my memory, just remembered a lot of rock and dirt and nothingness in that upper area. And so I remembered the Armory. And so I asked to take a tour of it because I heard such a big stink. And I took a tour, and it brought back all the memories of how old the buildings were. And I have seen this through this process that Public Works has worked very, very hard to listen and has made a lot of changes to meet the Historic Review Board guidelines and to try to appease and work with the neighborhood. So I am just here to speak on behalf of, as a longtime citizen of Oregon City, in favor of the proposal that they're putting forward, because I believe that they have done a really good job of meeting the requirements, and I think that they deserve to be able to move forward with their project. Thank you.
Thank you. Henry McEnroth.
McEnroth.
Sorry.
That's okay. You'd be surprised how many different ways I've heard it. 912 5th Street, Oregon City, and I'm also an ex-Oregon City Public Works employee and also an ex-Oregon City city engineer and currently vice chair of the Traffic Advisory Committee. In general, I'm in favor of what is going on in terms of placement of buildings.
Can I interrupt? Are you speaking for the Traffic Advisory Committee?
Pardon?
Are you speaking? I'm going to pause.
Oh,
this.
I'm
Are
sorry.
you
I
speaking on
am
behalf
not
of them?
speaking as the vice chair. This is only my own opinion.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Need to make that clear. And I am generally in favor of the placement of the buildings and keeping. I very much in favor of keeping of the Armory. I like that idea. Having worked on, in my previous employment with the city, worked on placing as something up there for administration purposes, I feel like they have done a very good job of what they've got together. I always can nitpick, though, and I would like to see more of a wood exterior on that building rather than brick and CMU and sheet metal on the buildings that go in, the new buildings. Not on the Armory, but on the new buildings. And so that they are more in keeping with the surroundings of the area and the neighborhood ambiance, if you will, in the area. And I would like to see the administration building split into maybe two close by each other so they're not overwhelming in size. But outside of that, generally speaking, I think it's much better than anything I put together 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Charles Combs.
At 454 South Center Street in Oregon City. These comments are on my own behalf. I think I've identified a conflict with the decision criteria for the Historic Review Board. The decision criteria includes the comprehensive plan, and state rule makes the transportation plan part of the comprehensive plan, and there is a shared use path in the transportation plan that extends from about the first house northeast of the Armory to the end of Waterboard Park, and then around the uphill side of the uphill site. And there's no provision in the application for retaining that shared use path. So when the site is fenced and gated, the existing public access over John Adams between Spring Street and South Center Street will be blocked off unless there's something else provided for that access. And it's important to retain that public access. I assume that you all are familiar with the use of that path, and it's been described earlier. People come down from the top, down Waterboard Park Road. They can access shops and restaurants in the McLaughlin neighborhood, the promenade, the elevator, downtown area, and can get down to the Falls Overlook down South 2nd off of South Center Street. So it's an important path, and there are a number of connecting walking and bicycle solutions and shared walking and bicycle solutions identified that connect into that path in the transportation plan. So those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Representing the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association, Jesse Buss.
Thank you. Don't know if we'll actually end up using those or not, but my name is Jesse Buss. I live on Washington Street, and I'm representing currently the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association. If I run out of time, just start waving at me because I may not notice the broken light. Comments were submitted this afternoon by the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association, so there's no expectation that anyone will have had a chance to read them at this point. So I'll just go over them briefly and hit the main points, and then I'll hand out hard copies at the end.
So we don't have them already. You have the.
Trevor has them, maybe in his email, but that's all I know.
Oh.
Yeah, they're right here, and I'll hand them out in a minute. Starting kind of at the procedural beginning, this hearing, as you know, is continuance from last month, but the notices sent out notifying the public about this hearing are still deficient. There are maps included in the CD with exhibits and many other exhibits as well, but local code requires that hearings like this be posted every 600 feet on frontage for the site. So there are a lot of signs, and were a lot of signs on the Center Street frontage, but only one up on John Adams, and that was at the intersection with Waterboard Park Road. There's nothing on Waterboard Park Road in the forested area, and that's almost an 800-foot expanse. So the effect of that is that people coming down from the top or going into the park, into the forest, would not have seen the sign actually in the forested area, so people may not know about the hearing. So it should be renoticed and postponed to another time. The contents of the notice are also deficient because it doesn't, as Mr. Combs said, specify all the criteria that are actually under review. It doesn't mention the comprehensive plan, which does apply to this decision. It doesn't mention the parks master plan and the transportation master plan. But those are criteria as described in the written comments, and the notice needs to state that. Also, and this is kind of an extension of the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association's application for historic landmark designation of the Camp Adair buildings. But as you know from last month, City Manager Conkle wrote a letter on April 18th purporting to reject historic landmark designation for the Camp Adair buildings. That same statute that he is relying on in subsection 2 says that no demolition permit may be issued for 120 days after such a rejection. That date is August 16th. So this board doesn't have authority to actually issue a permit until mid-August. So the hearing should be continued for that reason as well. These maps, and let me just pull up a couple. Are simply demonstrative. There are copies included in the packets, but what I'm holding here is a 1991 map from the Parks Master Plan in Oregon City. And it shows all the existing parks and proposed parks. The site area for this proposed development is here, shown clearly as an existing park. Public Works is not a park use that is authorized under the Comprehensive Plan or the Parks Master Plan. The same thing is true of the current Parks Master Plan. This is currently in effect. It shows the site as parkland. This is also included in your packet. And the final one is much smaller and much older, but it shows that this area has been considered a park for a very long time. This is a copy of a page from the 1952 adopted Parks Master Plan. Shows the site developed for park uses exclusively. The packet also contains materials going back to 1910, showing that the area was purchased by the Board of Water Commissioners with the intent of building a reservoir and making everything a city park. The reservoir was eventually built up on the hill, and all we have left is a park. It was consistently and has been consistently referred to as a park throughout history.
You're on the yellow light.
Thank you. So I'll let the written comments speak for themselves. Thank you for your time.
Now, did you intend to speak as an individual as well? I have a second comment form
right
here.
I filled that out to make clear that what I just said was on behalf of the Neighborhood Association,
Okay.
And now speaking on behalf of myself, I'm going to agree with the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association.
That's keeping it concise.
I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. William Gifford.
Sorry, Mike. Tidy up your space here, will you?
And we're getting copies of his comments.
Jesse, can we keep those maps? So we
oh,
take these pictures of them?
They're included in the materials I submitted. I'm welcome. I can keep them here for a little bit. Sure.
I'll email them to you tomorrow. Right away.
Okay.
Mr. Temporary Chair and members of the Commission and committee. My name is William Gifford. I live in Oregon City. A few years ago, I was chair of the McLaughlin Neighborhood Association, and at that time, that was a few years ago, we were pretty much opposed to the original design of the Public Works facility in that location. And after a lot of investigation, I changed my mind on that. And I think that the location is the best we can do right now. And I don't think that we should wait any longer. We've been waiting a long time for a public works facility, and I don't see another option for us to do that. However, I recognize that this board is not the Planning Commission, and it's not the Natural Resources Commission. It is the Historic Review Board, and it seems to me as though, and I'm sure that our attorney would would correct me if I'm wrong, that your opinions should be framed within the context of the historicity of buildings and the site. To that end, I want to make sure that decisions that are made regarding particular buildings, as whether or not they are historic, are not construed as a straw man argument, in the fact that that would detract you from looking at the real issues as to whether or not we need this facility sited here, and whether or not it can be sited here. And I think that it's been there. The plans that have been proposed that were shown on maps from the 50s are interesting in an historical context, but I think the actuality of it is that those plans, although adopted by the City Commission, were never realized. Those plans were never put into to any construction. My time is about up. I just want to say that I support the design, and I think that our community needs an adequate facility for our public works, and I appreciate your approving it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And that is all of the comment cards that I have here. Does the applicant have any response to any of those comments? Okay, I think at this point then we close the public hearing portion and proceed with deliberations. So I'm looking left and right to see who's going to speak first.
Well, you want to go? I have some clarification, and I'm not sure if, where to go.
Sure, go ahead.
That Charles brought up about the transportation. I mean, is that in our purview, the transportation versus the comprehensive plan?
I think that the comment was that the path needs to be included, and I don't think the path is relevant to the certificate of appropriateness that you are charged with evaluating. I think it may be part of the master plan amendment that goes before the planning commission.
Okay.
I think that would be the more appropriate place to discuss,
That's
to evaluate that.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, just,
that helps.
because I didn't think that. And then, as far as notices, that's something that's, again, outside of our purview, I would imagine. And, as far as sufficient notice, it wouldn't affect our decision on the appropriateness.
It's difficult for me to respond because I haven't read this yet. One of the claims is that the notice contents were deficient, and I believe I think that we have properly identified all the applicable approval criteria, so I'm comfortable with that issue. This question of notice being posted on each frontage of the subject property, whether or not notices were posted on the Center Street frontage for the proposed project, only one copy of the notice was posted on South John Adams Street frontage. Although Waterboard Park Road is frontage for the site, no copies of the notice were posted along it south of South John Adams Street. Even though the site frontage there exceeds 600 feet, the attached map shows the distance that the frontage has at least 665 feet.
So can we make a decision decision?
Well,
I mean, or
we have
should
a couple
just-
of options. We could take a break and move to another agenda item and come back to this one after I have an opportunity to read the letter. We could continue this to the next meeting, and I could come back, and if there is a notice problem, we could deal with it. What do you think, Laura?
That's why I was bringing it up, just in the time frame that we have.
Yeah, probably. The other thing I want to point out with regard to these objections that doesn't have anything to do with the notice, but is worth pointing out, the Neighborhood Association brought up this idea that the HRB can't review this until August, until 120 days passes. That statute applies to a demolition permit. This is not a demolition permit. So I do think you have authority to proceed. So if you want to move on to the next item, we can come back and deliberate about this if you want to, or we can. What do you want to do? Is that how you'd like to go forward, or would you like to take a 5-minute break and?
If you have sufficient time to look it over and feel comfortable, we can reassess at that time. Okay.
Or can they be doing that while we
switch items? Come back.
That's fine.
Or break.
We can, either way, which would the word?
And a bit of a time check
Let's
too.
move on to the next item.
If you only need 5 minutes to do that, I think we can discuss other items on this application while you do
doing
that,
right?
and
Okay.
then
Just in the
continue from there.
interest of time.
Did you have other observations to make?
I'm, more or less responding. I am pretty much in favor of most of what the staff has reported. As far as using wood versus other materials, this is going to be a long-term structure that is going to probably receive a lot of heavy usage, and I just think that they have really addressed using brick and not very much in the way of metal siding and stuff like that. So I'm comfortable with what they're proposing.
Grant?
Yeah, I would agree with those comments. It's an interesting thought about the materials, but I think that the existing design is within what I would consider acceptable as far as materials go. I also comment that I think that the Public Works Department has gone out of their way to obtain community feedback and revise their design several times and improved it based on our comments and the public's comments. And so I'm appreciative of that and in favor of approving with the staff conditions.
Was that a motion? Well, we can't do that until we...
What about your comments?
My comments are, I'm looking at the 6 proposed conditions for approval. Item number 1 makes whatever we do subject to the applicant obtaining the necessary permits and approvals from the master plan amendment and detailed development plan, geologic hazard review, and the planning division right-of-way permits. In other words, our input on this deals only with the design of the building and the compatibility of it with the historic neighborhood. Whether it actually follows through and complies with the remainder of the conditions of approval is beyond our purview. I should point out, relative to some of the discussion comments, the conditions of approval recommended by staff include a landscaping plan that and documentation that a minimum of 20% of the site is landscaped rather than paved, and that there's a lot of discussion of trees and shrubs, specifying how many and what size. Mechanical equipment shall be screened from view. There's discussion of the fencing around the property. Obviously, it needs to be a secure site, so there will be fencing. And the applicant shall coordinate with the city to send out public notices for any parties interested in removing and rehabilitating the Camp Adair buildings. And the materials on the elevator, I think this has already been addressed, shall be comprised of the same materials proposed to be used on the building itself. So those are the staff recommendations for conditions of approval. And it looks like the jury is still working.
Are you guys done? I'm ready.
Okay.
Okay. So the question that I think is before us is this question about whether or not we properly posted the hearing signs. And as I understand it, there was a sign posted at the end of the path as you would, if you were to walk through Waterboard Park and towards the site. Is that a proper description, Laura? And
yes,
I don't know how you describe that spot right there.
so it's at the end of, it's where John Adams right-of-way turns into the site.
So there was a sign there.
Near the intersection of First or Spring Street and John Adams.
The obligation to post signage is on each frontage of the subject property. And this is taken from their memo. A frontage is that portion of a parcel of property that abuts a dedicated public street or highway or approved private way. South John or the south side of the public works property abuts the park. It does not abut a dedicated public street or highway or private way. So I would suggest that no signage was required on where the park abuts the public works operations site. And as a practical matter, I don't know who would see it other than the people who would be on the path, and as I mentioned, the people coming towards the site from the path would see the sign at the John Adams right-of-way. And we also didn't notice through the middle of the site, because we don't notice in the middle of the site, we notice along frontage. So I think, I am fairly confident that, what?
Can we show where that sign was up there?
Sure, it's in the record.
Trevor, do you know?
I didn't quite hear you.
I just want to
Just the mouth.
I just want to make sure you know where. So basically, the end of the right-of-way is right in this area right here, and the sign posting was placed right here, facing anybody that's coming up or down John Adams Street. So if you're on this pedestrian path, unless you trespass onto the state property, you would walk down off the path and right in front of that sign. There's nowhere else for you to go, unless, of course, you cross into the parking lot here. So that's the most prominent area. It's the most prominent area for drivers and pedestrians.
So I'm comfortable that the notice was adequate, and I think we can move forward with a decision if you are ready to do that.
Okay, thank you.
I'm happy to respond to any other questions you may have.
Given the city's recommendation that they feel they've properly noticed the application, I would move to approve with the staff's recommended conditions.
And the condition, with the conditions.
And
With,
Yeah, with
with
the
the,
condition.
yes,
Okay.
recommended conditions from the report.
I second it.
all right. It has been moved and seconded. Shall you call the roll?
Roll. Board Member Met,
Aye.
Board Member Blythe,
Aye.
and Interim Chair Basinger.
Aye.
Motion carries.
All right. Thank you all for that, and we'll now move along to the next item on the agenda, the cottages. Item 3B, HR 1609 through 1614.
When we started this hearing tonight, I said we were going to try to do this once, but we've had new folks come in, so I've got to read it again real quick.
Okay.
A staff report has been prepared for this application, has been made available to the public 7 days before this hearing. The staff report identifies the approval criteria. Please, shh, move out of the room quietly and close the door. Thanks. The staff report identifies the approval criteria that apply to each applicant's proposal. Staff has analyzed the criteria which are contained in the staff report. The quasi-judicial hearing procedure that the commission will follow is set out in state law and the Oregon City Municipal Code. The hearing procedure steps are shown on the chart. Anyone wishing to speak should fill out a speaker's card and give it to the planning staff. Speakers will proceed in the order their card is received. You should fill out your address on the cards. The city will notify you of its final decision. Please begin all testimony stating your name. Testimony and evidence should be directed to the applicable approval criteria. If you believe other criteria apply in addition to those addressed in the staff report, identify and discuss these criteria and explain how and why you believe they apply to the application under consideration. A person may submit any written material while the public record is open on each application. Any materials received by city staff during the time period in which the record is open will be placed in the record. If the Historic Review Board makes a decision with which you disagree, any issue maybe that you wish to appeal must have been raised for the consideration of the City Commissioner or LUBA or both without raising the issue on the record with sufficient specificity and accompanied by statements or evidence that the city and all parties can respond. The issue will not be deemed appealable to the State Land Use Board of Appeals. In addition, the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issues precludes an action for damages in circuit court. This is a continued hearing. I will ask the board members if they have any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or any other statement to declare since you last considered this particular application.
None?
No.
No.
Have you visited the site
Yes.
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 since the last hearing?
Yes. Today.
Yes.
Yes.
Anything you want to note about your visit?
Nope.
Anyone wish to question the board members about these disclosures or any other questions you may have for them? Seeing none, we will now commence with the staff report.
Great. Again, Trevor Martin, Oregon City Planning Division. We've gone over this a couple times, so I'm going to keep it brief with this one as well. HR 1609 through HR 1604, the cottage homes. And find my right keyboard. So just some brief background. So here was the site plan originally submitted with the original application. These were the setbacks were kind of the main area of focus of the initial application. At the last HRB meeting, the HRB basically tasked the applicant to go back and look at the setbacks and to make some adjustments. The applicant has submitted kind of a revised site plan here. And the big areas you can see is that the applicant has increased space between house 4 and the parcel to the Cassidy house, and they have adjusted their parking and landscaping in this area to accommodate for more of a buffer space between the site and the house over here, and move some parking back in front of house number 1. And then they have also proposed additional landscaping as well, increasing landscaping abutting Miller and between the Cassidy home and the proposed site. The applicant also, at the last HRB meeting, this is just a quick reference, submitted these materials kind of showing different site layouts and illustrations. Again, more information that was submitted during the last HRB meeting. More. And again, elevation showing the proposed parking in front of house number 1 here with the retaining wall on the side. This was discussed which was discussed at the last HRB meeting. Some more elevation diagrams and different, I guess, designs that could take place on the site. More elevations and how the retaining wall applies to the site. And again, looking at the house looking at the site from the neighboring parcel and looking at the proposed retaining walls and the overall massing of the site as it relates to the Cassidy house. So that's basically just kind of a brief update in what we discussed last time, what the applicant has submitted. And I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you. Does the applicant have anything to say?
Yes.
Come on up.
I'm Chris Staggs. I live at 8903 Southwest Nordic Drive in Portland, and I'm the applicant for this development for this project. I just want to go through a couple of things to remind everybody what we talked about the last time and some of the things that were discussed. Trevor, do you mind putting up our revised site plan on the screen? First, I'm going to just do a summary of what I consider the kind of sort of big ideas and big points that we're considering with this development and with the all the considerations. One is what we're proposing on this property is lower in density than the adjacent property in terms of site coverage and visual mass. It is true it's not lower in density in terms of dwelling units. But the cottage home guidelines are specifically talk about the visual density, and I'm just going to read a piece of that here. In the cottage home guidelines in section 17.62059 of the Oregon City Code, in section B, the intent of the cottage housing. The intent of the cottage housing is to provide a housing that responds to changing household sizes and ages. And I'm paraphrasing, I'm not reading every word of this, but I'm sort of trying to get to the essence of what cottage housing is about. In B2, it says to encourage creation of more usable open space for residents. B3, to ensure overall size, including bulk and mass of cottage structures and cottage housing developments, remains smaller and incur less visual impact than standard size single-family dwellings. And then section 4, to provide centrally located and functional common open space that fosters a sense of community and sense of openness in the neighborhood. So it is true that the density that we're proposing in terms of dwelling units is higher than a single family dwelling or typical residential single-family dwelling units in the R6 code. But in terms of visual impact and visual mass and the subsequent mitigation of those things, we are actually proposing lower density than the neighbor to right on the corner, the Cassidy house. The density we're proposing is, again, much lower than what is proposed on the corner house right next to us. Everyone knows that we're on a constrained site. We have a hillside and a wetland that we've identified, we've delineated, and we're preserving. We're preserving an environmental amenity of the community, and we believe that with the preservation of that amenity and the preservation of the wetland, that we are it's appropriate and justified for the preservation incentives that we're requesting as a part of this application. Preservation incentives to have the homes adjacent or on the property line and closer to the property line than is normally seen in the R6 zoning code. When we concluded the last hearing, we ended with a series of concluding comments by the board that outlined sort of here's what we'd like you to go and look at and come back to us with some of these alternative ideas, which is what the sketch represents and these two drawings represent. And essentially what they represent is keeping 7 units on the property, moving houses numbers 4 and 5 further away from the property line between us and the Cassidy house. So that house number 4 went from being 7 feet away from the property line to now is 15 feet away from the property line. So we are not meeting the 20-foot setback, which is in the R6 zoning, but we've doubled the distance that we're moved it away from the property line. And obviously we're constrained by the wetland on the other side. We have also reduced the retaining wall condition on the west property line between us and the west property owner, so that that retaining wall will now be a maximum of approximately between 4 and 5 feet tall, reducing the impact of the neighbor to the west. We're also proposing, in addition to the very dense hedge of Douglas firs between us and the Cassidy house, we're also proposing additional landscape mitigation between us and the Cassidy house, and also between the two homes on Miller Street and in that right-of-way between Miller and the house numbers 6 and 7. And this drawing is trying to illustrate how we're visually reducing the visual impact of our proposed homes and the visual impact on the public in the public realm, essentially. We'd also like to note that in the Cassidy house, the structure on the west side of the property, the barn and the larger building, those are not living units. Those are not living spaces. So the visual impact, we think, is...
Chris, can I interrupt you for just a second here?
Sure.
We're in a real bad time crunch, and if we're going to get through
Give
this...
me 2 minutes.
Okay,
I'll be done in 2
Thank you.
minutes. So the visual impact between us and the Cassidy house, we think, is properly mitigated with what we're proposing. So just in summary, we increased the setbacks. We're increasing the landscape mitigation between us and the Cassidy house and between us and the Miller Street. And we're also reducing the height of the retaining wall. So every time we've come back, we've addressed the questions and the concerns of the board. The last thing I want to mention are a couple of key points that were brought up in the last meeting that I think are salient and considered in this application, and that should be strongly considered in the board's decision to approve the development. There were several comments such as this project has done a great job of fitting the homes on the site in a challenging, constrained site. Most of what we're proposing has been approved many times before in the Kenema neighborhood in the recent past, including retaining wall heights, including density, and including historically challenging or historically. There's been many conditions over the past 6 to 8 months of approvals of other projects that are there are several streets in Kenema where cars are parked in the right of way, so we think that we're actually doing a better job than the normal in Kenema. And I'd like to just conclude with when we look at the Kenema historical appropriateness of the project, and we look at the cottage home guidelines in terms of density, and we look at the underlying zoning code of the R6 zone, we strongly believe that what we're proposing here is very closely aligned with the city's intent of the cottage home guidelines in terms of providing economic incentives, responding to the changing household sizes and ages of the community. We're in alignment with the Kenema sort of bulk and mass of structures in that neighborhood, and we think that what we're proposing will be in alignment with all of those requirements of the historic nature of the R6 zone and also of the cottage development.
Okay, thank you very much. Howard Post.
Good evening. I'm Howard Post, 302 Blanchard, Oregon City, Oregon. What I want to do is just hit a couple things because it's probably going to be covered in somebody else's preview, so I don't want to miss it. But if I miss something, I want to be able. Number one, this is a National Registered Historic District. There's no precedence for this at all. There's federal guidelines, state guidelines, and city guidelines. One of the big things with the guidelines is conforming. I don't see where this conforms to a National Historic District. Number two, parking or lack of. They've addressed some of this. I've just put these up, so I'm just touching. There's a thing about preservation incentives as setbacks. There is no such thing, but they are. Wetlands and flood zones were addressed. They will be addressed later. One of the codes for the historic district, there is no aluminum windows allowed in a historic district. There is no metal roofs allowed in a historic district. This is federal guidelines. Number 7, there's another concern. They want to put a homeowners association in a National Registered Historic District. That might be rules within rules. What defines Kenema is a steep pitch roof and the windows. That's usually the defining factors. We can't tell people what to build, but that kind of sits the thing. Kenema has no land use committee, so we're speaking as private citizens, period. I just wanted this in the record, so if it's not addressed, we can deal with it later. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you, Howard.
Daniel Fisher. And in the interest of moving along, if you agree with what someone said previously, it's sufficient to just say, I agree with that.
Hi, my name's Dan Fisher. I live at 421 Fifth Avenue, and there is nothing historic about this plan at all. This should not be happening in our neighborhood at all. Mr. Skaggs talks about density of dwellings. What he's failing to mention is density of cars and vehicles that are going to come along with those dwellings. I moved into this area a year ago, April, and live about 120 feet west of the proposed parking lot. If I was aware of anything like this could actually happen in Kenema, I would have not moved here. I feel very welcome in the neighborhood that I'm in. I absolutely love it. Love the tranquility of it. And I do believe that this idea of a neighborhood within a neighborhood is not at all what should be in Kenema. You as a board are obligated to make sure that we are in check as neighbors, and in doing so, you use the toolbox that we use whenever we want to make changes to our homes. We check out the regulations, setbacks, all of those things, from windows to roofs to you name it. So I expect you to do the same, use the same toolbox we use, and I think with setbacks and stuff, this is a challenging lot to begin with wetlands, and it's oddly shaped. So I think if you use that toolbox, you'll come up with the right answers. But use that toolbox, please. That's all I have to say.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tori Goodwin.
Tori Goodwin. I'm at 502 4th Avenue.
And specify if you're speaking for a neighborhood association.
And I am the chair of the association, but I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking on behalf of the association.
Thank you.
I'm going to read this just because obviously this surrounds my home, so it's a little emotional for me, so I may not say what I want to if I do it in freedom. So this development's asking for special exceptions for density rules in our historical neighborhood. It shouldn't become an automatic okay to bend the rules because he possibly didn't do his due diligence in the type of land he's trying to develop on. I can't say he didn't, but I can say we're trying to push an agenda that should never be put on this property due to the stuff that's on the property. I mean, he's pushing this density on a property that doesn't have that much space to build. And I feel like it's very disrespectful to the historical aspect of our neighborhood. It's disrespectful to the historical registry. Kenema is not about the newest and greatest trends. Kenema is about history and being respectful of that. And this density of small homes and parking lots and all that comes with it is not respectful to our guidelines, and it's not respectful to the historical registry. And I don't feel that the historical registry nor the neighborhood should have to compromise because there are natural resource things inhibiting his agenda. Therefore, instead of listening to us neighbors and listening to you, he's still trying to push his density agenda without hearing us out. I just feel like he wants those 7 homes, and as much as we cry out and tell him maybe that's too dense, moving something 5 or 10 feet still creates density up against those wetlands and up against my home. And I don't see how historically this is respectful, and I don't see how it fits our guidelines. That's it.
Thank you. Clint?
Clint Goodwin. I live in Kenema in the Cassidy house on the corner, as you know. You guys are my neighbors. You guys are our spokespersons for the historic nature of our neighborhood. I do want to remind you that in the city of Oregon, although this can be permittable for cottages, and so can vinyl windows and 6-foot fences around our homes and 12-foot brush and concrete and all these other things that maybe some of us would want. But we moved into a national historic neighborhood where those things are governed by the historic building code and the way we build. We go into this neighborhood knowing that, and he's trying to go around those rules. I do something that they didn't touch on we have in the past, but I want to remind you, just because it's permittable through Oregon City doesn't mean it's acceptable in our historic neighborhood. There's going to be trash dumpsters, 2 of them. Where is another place that people live where there's trash dumpsters? Apartment buildings. These are detached apartments. However you look at it, they're small enough, they are detached apartments. It's going to be a homeowners association. There's going to be rules within rules and guidelines. It's going to be a division within our own neighborhood. So how do you govern that? The people that live in these homes won't even be able to own the land that they're on. It's an apartment building complex that are detached. You've got a picture in that picture, that nice green shrubbery. I appreciate that he's doing that. I don't have any problem with the style he's trying to build these, but these 7 buildings alone, you might as well just put an apartment complex. And him pushing it to the edge of the property, it's not our problem that he bought a property with wetlands that he can't build appropriately according to the new build instructions that were given through our guideline. And I've turned that book into you, and I've quoted this page: 1 house, 1 dwelling, 1 garage, 2 lots. That is the source, that is the pattern of 4th Avenue. The top side of the Kenema district, referred to as the south. Nothing below. It's 2 different kinds of feelings from below in that neighborhood and above. In the above, this is not anywhere near what our neighborhood is. And I know you guys living in this neighborhood, some of you, recognize that. So I would ask that you keep that in mind as you look at this. Just because it's permittable by the Oregon City Code doesn't mean it's permittable through our National Historic Review Board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Paul Edgar.
Thank you, Paul Edgar, Kenema. This is a National Historic Register district, and the preservation incentives violate the intent of OCMC 1740 code and the National Historic Preservation Code, and therefore they should not ever be considered. Secondly, even the setbacks from the wetlands, there's a need for a vegetated corridor. Just the other day, the Natural Resources Committee and the Planning Commission both stated the need for a vegetated corridor from water sites. Go through here. The hydrology on the site means that when they're trying to site these things right up next to something where it's actually flooded in the past. So there's history of flooding over this whole area. In the design compatibility of these proposed development, when we look at, after you set aside the space for the wetlands, the rest of this area is at a greater density than ever before considered in Kenema. This is therefore not compatible. The design compatibility of these units they have cutaway roofs. They have design characteristics which have never ever been seen or allowed or are compatible. And if they're not compatible, they detract. And when they detract, that's not appropriate. These buildings really can't be considered vernacular in design just because they have a steep pitch roof when the roofs are so modified with lights and things on the roof. These, I would go back and echo, there are basically there are 4 lots of record, and 3 of the lots are compromised by wetlands and creeks. But the rule of the code is 1 house per lot. And if it can't be put there, it can't be put there. We have to eliminate the skylights and cutaways in the roofs. They're not historically appropriate. The porches proposed have no compatibility with the vernacular and historically designed buildings within the district.
Down to 10 seconds, Paul.
The parking areas are not correct. We don't have anything like that, and therefore they detract.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Ron
Paul.
Beislein. Do you have to leave, Fred?
Let's try to get
Sign 712 4th Avenue. Here I'm personal. Response not for HRB liaison. The cottage rooms homes are not an issue that I have. The issue I have is in this area and the density we have in this area. We've heard the incentives that he is trying to get from the city. Those incentives are for personal homes that have restrictions, not for development of profit. He talks about parking. We think. He doesn't live in Kenema. We live in Kenema. Parking is an issue. Every home that you've approved in the last 3 years, or 4 years technically, has had a garage because of parking issues. Because the streets are narrow. There's no sidewalks. With this many homes on there, there's going to be more kids. Kenema, as you know, is starting to build up more kids now. There's new families with young children, including my own grandkids. There is a lot more people walking down these streets with children. Cars are bigger than children. They cannot see them. In this area, we'll have more children in this area, and especially that's one of the busiest corners. Coming up Hedges, up Miller to to South End Road, it's one of the busiest streets in Kenema. Not only that, with the other side of 4th Avenue, the Metro advertising the area in that area for walking paths, the park is always full of parking down there. We know there's a neighborhood association. There's cars parked all the way down the street now because there's not enough room parked up there. So safety for children, for the parking is a big issue I see. The rockery he submitted, he did lower the rockery. He had a picture of our rockery in our house. He said it was 15 feet tall. It is not 15 feet tall. It is 4 feet tall with an 8-foot divider between each rockery and level, so it's staggered. So those representation of our rockery is not true in his development he submitted. But I just ask you personally to think about this area and how much homes. I think people will be acceptable if there's not as many homes. And we think you should go along with those findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. We are now past our hard deadline here.
Yes, I guess it's whatever Grant is comfortable with.
Yeah, whatever you're comfortable with. If
one more applicant, and
I can ask if we could schedule a meeting a week out to continue this and the next item. Is that feasible?
One moment, let me take a look and see if the room is available. But you can continue.
While Laura's looking up what we're going to do about the lack of time tonight, what we might do for another meeting, I want to close the loop on the Public Works Operations Facility. You all approved that application. We are going to come back to you at your next meeting with revised findings that are consistent with your decision. We need to do that because there has to be a written decision that gets mailed, and then all participants have an opportunity to appeal the decision to the City Commission. I feel like that's important because what we have right now is a staff report that doesn't reflect the materials we received tonight. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that, and we are going to return at your next meeting. I doubt we will return at your meeting should you have it next week, but I would expect it will be your next regularly scheduled meeting, which would be
June 27th, I believe.
The only reason I'm suggesting if we could schedule a meeting before that is just the season And if projects are going forward, we need to say one way or the other.
Yeah. The 30th is the day after Memorial Day. I don't know.
Well, that's only 7 days, and that wouldn't give time enough for notice, would it?
No.
No.
It would need to be, I would think, 2 weeks out. Right, Laura?
6.
You have comments on the last application? I can try to delay them.
Okay. You keep working on that, and we're going to keep talking. Mr. Staggs, did you have any comments to respond to the personal, the public comments?
Briefly, yes.
Briefly, thank you.
Trevor, could you go to the previous drawing, the other site plan, right? I think it's important to note when we're talking about parking and density, particularly, those are the two big items that keep coming up. We did a calculation of the parking on the property on the corner, which is currently being used for parking, and the square footage of that parking area, which goes all the way back to the property line next to the right-of-way. It's the orange area on the Cassidy property. That's all being used as vehicle parking. Is 100 square feet larger than what we're proposing for our site. So if we're talking about consistency and appropriateness in Kenema, the parking lot that we're proposing is 100 square feet less than what they currently have on their property. We're not going to have dumpsters. We're going to have trash cans. So we're not going to have dumpsters on the property. And the trash cans will be enclosed in a trash can enclosure, so they won't be seen by the neighbors. I think it's important to address the, I'm not sure that it's the appropriate, I'm not sure that this place is the appropriate place to debate the social impact of the property in terms of the number of children running down the street. I mean, I have 4 kids. I care about my kids and I care about the safety of people in the neighborhood. Kenema is a very unique place in terms of the street sizes and the situation. The landscape, the roads, the density, everything. It's a very unique place. And from day one, working with the city planners in terms of what's appropriate for Kenema, we've been tirelessly trying to do what's right for Kenema and tirelessly trying to follow the code in terms of setbacks and density and wetland. So just want to reiterate that we think that our proposal is very appropriate for Kenema and very much in contextually appropriate with Kenema and contextually appropriate with the city's intent of what they want to do with the city in terms of growing and expanding and becoming a more lively place and all those goals of the city in terms of economic development. So we think we're in alignment with all those things.
Okay, thank you. And with that, we'll close the public testimony and move to deliberations, providing we have time.
Yeah, let's just go ahead and do it.
You okay, Matt?
Yeah, we're okay. Who wants to start? This is probably the most difficult item to come before the HRB in my experience, and probably
Mine too,
in
for a long time.
A long time. And I have to remind everybody that what we deal with is the city code. We're not allowed to enforce a standard that isn't written in city code. And whether or not we as individual board members agree with the cottage concept is irrelevant, because that isn't our decision, and the decision was made. And so we live with that.
Grant? I can add my comments. So I do appreciate the cottage housing design in general. And I appreciate the amount of work that's gone into this design. So it clearly was not just put together overnight. There was a lot of thought that went into it and a lot of consideration. And I also feel that cottage housing could be possible in the Kenema district. So the question came up at the very first meeting that this item was discussed, that yes, the two overlays technically could be allowed, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be allowed. So just because the cottage housing code overlays with R6 and the National Historic District does not mean that there's precedent for building cottage housing in the historic district. However, I do feel that you could build cottage housing and it could be complementary in the sense that the scaling and massing could be reduced and be more compatible with the other historic homes that are probably more of the size of the cottage houses that are proposed. That being said, the purpose, I think, of the last meeting and the comments was to come back with something that was more buildable. So right now we had 4 pages roughly of findings with a potential addition of several more, to the point that we felt that it wasn't actually possible to build something that complied with the findings. So my hope was that we would see something that allowed us to reduce findings from the staff report so that we could be fairly certain that if it was approved, it would be close to what was actually built. I don't find that that's happened. Specifically, the comments that I had were regarding the setbacks, which have been partially addressed but not entirely. The preservation incentive setbacks have generally been approved on one side of the property when there's geographic considerations. I don't have any problem doing with that, particularly maybe on Miller Street. But I think approving them on several different sides of a property is sort of a new precedent. I also didn't see any changes to the roof cutouts, so that I would agree that don't fit the vernacular style, and some of the non-rectangular windows that I also don't feel fit the vernacular style.
I agree with you that I have those both, that the roof cutouts and the basic glass walls, because of the size, and also the chalet porches. I call them chalet porches. But I think my biggest stopping block is the density of having 7, and I don't know if he needs 7 to have it pencil out. But and then pushing it right up against the wetlands with, when you look above at what, and I know that we don't, that's not in our purview, but when you're citing something right next to an area that, like just above it, there's been problems. And with the wetlands being right there, I just don't see, with the density. Also, he mentioned about the parking. Yes, the parking adjacent there is for 1 home. The other is for 7 homes and 10 spaces, which is 10 cars, which wouldn't even fit in the other the Cassidy parking. So I just have a real problem, I guess, most with the density. And I don't know how do you put that in as far as findings, you know.
In our last
and
meeting,
the architectural things that I mentioned.
in our last meeting, we talked at length about the density. And in our last meeting, we did talk at length about the density and determined that when you take the footprints or the combined footprints of the 7 structures, they do fall within the city code regarding allowable density, and in fact do so by a fairly significant margin. My concern remains the fenestration and the contemporary design of the chalet styles. And I agree with Grant in that I was hoping to see something addressing that this time so that we could know what we're voting for. Because I don't believe that the chalet style is compatible at all in Kenema.
I have a point of clarification on the, as far as the density, is that the density that's allowed within that full property, or is it allowed within that full property minus the wetlands?
So what you're reviewing is the overall impact of the proposed development. And so in your staff report, you take like a grander look at this. What is the overall impact of this on the historic district? And just to summarize what's in the staff report, there is a condition of approval and findings that say that you cannot use preservation incentives, and so it requires all the buildings to meet the setbacks and then the parking lots to be placed on site. So that would change the design. You don't really know what that design is, but if you craft a condition of approval closely enough, you put what the rules are and then whatever comes out. And so there is no condition of approval specifically in the draft staff report right now with any number of units. It's just saying exclude this part and exclude that part, and then you'll have a space left over, and however you want to fit those buildings in is up to you. So regarding your question about overall density, there are no density requirements, right? I mean, we're talking about how development is impacted on a grander scale through the appropriateness lens of the historic district and the preservation incentives. So overall, is that appropriate for a historic district? Yes, no, and then articulate why so we can get that in your findings. And did they identify the criteria for meeting preservation incentives? So it sounds like we had a little bit of comments regarding preservation incentives.
So the whole concept of density is derived from siting and preservation incentives. So it's finding that balance of what works with the site, and does that translate into density? That translates.
Looking at contextual appropriateness as a whole,
Yeah.
not X number of dwelling units per something.
Right.
In my opinion, when most people make comments about density with this project, they're not referring to actual square footage of the buildings per square footage of the site density. They're talking about the crowding. I think it would be possible to build something on a 20,000 square foot site with this amount of square foot of building in general, but this specific configuration not complying with the setbacks, I think creates the crowding issue, which I think is what most people are actually referring to when they're worried about the density. So again, my main concern, I guess, is that because of the condition number 2, if we approve with those conditions, anything that we approved would have to come back again because it would require the site to be reconfigured. So we talked about that possibility, but we kind of discussed that if any of the buildings move or change substantially in design, then it has to come back anyway. I think looking at this drawing and with the other setbacks, if we approve with those conditions, the design as submitted is not buildable, would be my main concern of that.
Just for clarification, you said that the preservation incentives would be denied and that the parking would need to be put on site within the property boundaries. And if I'm understanding that correctly, then it deals with the 2 spaces on Miller Street and the 1 space on 4th Avenue that are actually outside the property lines. Okay.
I think the current design as in front of us has, well, I see 10, oh wait, there's, okay, never mind. I see the 11th spot. It was hiding.
Claire, anything?
Your
There's
choices.
a lot of moving parts here.
There's a lot of moving parts.
There are, yeah.
So if you feel uncomfortable with the conditions of approval as they stand, you can add clarity to them. So add additional requirements to those conditions. If you're looking towards a denial, keep talking as to why so we can capture those findings. We may have to come back at an additional meeting to adopt findings if they're significantly different than the staff report.
So I'll ask, can staff write conditions of approval that are more definitive in terms of those 2 issues, the setbacks and the off-site parking?
We can amend the conditions of approval as the board sees fit if you provide guidance as to what you want to see.
I think the parking issue is part of the site plan review, is that right? Or the waiver on having all of the parking on site is part of the site plan review?
As a part of the site plan, this application is subject to a review of a variety of other processes, including environmental, with our geologic hazards, as well as a site plan design review. Site plan design review will have to look at, it does look at parking, correct? As it applies to historic review board review, it's again that net overall impact. What is the overall impact of the site in relationship to the historic district, and is the overall impact appropriate? So in the staff report, the answer was, whatever number of units is fine, but it's got to fit on site. In order to be, you're mitigating the number of additional units by meeting the setbacks and putting all of the other stuff like parking on site. And as a net, those sort of balance out. But as we discussed last time, if you were to meet all the setbacks of zoning designation, certainly that design would not work. But that question of where the buildings are on the site and its parking does not address what you all were talking about with regard to fenestration and finishes and modern characteristics. And I think that Mr. Martin has tried to draft conditions to try to get there. But I think that the question for you is, are the conditions enough when you haven't seen it? You aren't going to get to see it if you go with these conditions. It doesn't sound like you all have specific additions to the conditions in your heads right now. So we either return, you all study the conditions and make that decision at a subsequent hearing. You trust that staff has covered this sufficiently. I can't say one way or the other.
I can appreciate that there's a whole lot of conditions here, and I was at the last HRB meeting where you said there's too many, we don't know enough. And I'm not sure that you know any more now than you did then. So, so if you don't know anything more now, your choices are continue it and tell the applicant once again, we need more, deny it because you don't have what you need, or revisit these conditions and try to come up with some language. And I don't mean to rush you, but I'm kind of rushing you.
We appreciate being rushed.
But if we deny it, it has to be with specific findings.
Well, I think you've said, you know, you don't feel like these conditions are sufficiently detailed to be able to evaluate the compatibility issues with this project. And I think that that could be the findings coupled with the sort of materials, windows, modern elements, architectural components. I mean, those could be findings for denial.
Well, to just get the ball rolling one way or the other, I move that we do not approve this with the findings that she, because it's hard to.
We're going to come back. My point is we're going to write these and come back and you're going to say yes or no.
Okay.
I mean, because this is significantly different. Oftentimes we don't return to you with findings because your decision largely matches what we've got in the staff report. This is a different decision. So we've got to write it and bring it back.
So the motion then would be to request staff to rewrite the.
Well, the motion would be a denial of the application with a request that staff come back with written findings consistent with your deliberation.
So moved.
So moved.
Yeah, I would, with the addition of specific the findings that I'm using to justify that are the overall design, the lack of compliance with the setbacks,
was that a second?
It's going to be a second. But I wanted to detail the findings so that they can add them to the reasons why. The cutouts into the roof, the lack of or the non-rectangular windows that don't design with it. The design standards overall add up to a design that does not, in my opinion, satisfy the conditions that are necessary for approval. So yes, I second that motion to deny.
It is moved and seconded. And for clarity, it is a motion to deny.
To continue the
and
hearing.
to continue the hearing.
Yes.
For the staff to come back with findings.
Mm-hmm. So we want to continue to our June hearing date.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, with a date certain, June 27th.
June 27th.
Isn't it?
Yep.
June 27th.
Okay, 1 second here. Okay. So, board member Matt.
Aye.
Board member Basinger.
Aye.
And board member Blythe.
Aye.
Okay. Motion carries. So that will be continued to June 27th here with revised findings.
And now I ask where you stand.
Go.
Let's
Say
just try to
your
get through it. I think we can.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, are you guys okay?
are
Do you want to
you-
move this to
I'm
the...
fine. It's
We're okay.
Let's just, let's try to, there's not many comments, I think, on this one. So
We
I
are moving forward now to HR 1701.
I haven't seen anyone new that has come in since we read this at the last
a lot of people left.
matter. So I'm going to, the same quasi-judicial public hearing procedures apply to this matter as to the previous matter. I am going to poll the board and ask them if they have any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or any other standards to declare. And this is with regard to the New single-family home in the Kenema Historic District at the intersection of 4th Avenue and Ganong
Yes.
Street.
Okay.
And so I'm going to give you an opportunity to disclose any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, bias, or other statement to declare.
None.
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 Have you all visited the site?
Yes.
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 Do you want to say when
We're
you
good.
visited it and anything that you wanted to note?
Before and today.
I've not walked on the property. I've walked around across the front of the property.
I visited the site this last weekend.
Anyone wish to question the board members on these disclosures? Seeing none, we'll start with the staff report.
Okay. Quickly, again, so this is a continuation from a previous Historic Review Board meeting. Oops, wrong keyboard. So just a really brief overview. This is at the intersection of 4th Avenue and Ganong Street. Again, here is that right-of-way from Ganong and 4th. As you can see in the image, there is the retaining wall along here, and then the 4th Avenue right-of-way, or the Ganong right-of-way, kind of goes up into the site a little differently. So here is the most recent site plan submitted by the applicant. Not much has changed since the last meeting. Again, here's the Ganong right-of-way kind of coming up to the home with the proposed attached garage. Elevations looking at the home, front of the home, side loading garage coming from Ganong, the Ganong right-of-way, and the other elevations of the home looking at the rear and the right side elevation. And that's mostly it. Not much has changed.
Thanks, Trevor.
Does the applicant care to speak?
Iceland Architects, 1307 7th Street, Oregon City.
John Ayers, 7139 Montauk Circle, Lake Oswego.
We really haven't changed much since we were asked to continue this. We have gone out and met with Mr. Edgar at the site also and explained to him why we cited it, where we did, and we really don't have a lot of options. We're disturbing the minimal amount of the site as opposed to having the detached garage, which was disturbing significantly more of the site and significantly more cost to build, and became unfeasible at that point. We've set it back just enough so we have room on the property to provide a stormwater facility that's required, because we are in a slope hazard area. Geotech has said we can't detain all of the water on site, so we have to provide some kind of stormwater system that will overflow into the city sewer, which we're going to have to upgrade also as part of this project. So we're here hoping for approval tonight.
Where is that stormwater retention?
Well, it'll be a stormwater planner. It'll be down below the stairway down there in that area. That's the only portion of the site that we're going to be allowed to place anything.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody have any questions for the applicant?
No questions.
Nope.
There are no comment forms, so at this time we will close public testimony and deliberate. Comments?
I move that we approve 1701, HR 1701 with the recommendations and conditions of approval.
Do you have any comments on the garage while we're
Well, we can
Oh.
discuss that after a motion is made or before. I do have comments to
Oh,
make.
well, then
on
I
that.
withdraw my motion.
Okay.
I thought
Okay.
we were ready to.
My observation, and particularly in light of the discussion that we just had about density in Kenema and what Mr. Beislein had to say about the advantages of getting the cars out of the right-of-way and basically out of sight, all speaks toward the advantage of having the garage there for the sake of the overall appearance and the visual impact on the neighborhood. And I would recommend deleting that condition number 1 as a condition of approval. It's my opinion.
So I did read the design guidelines in detail today. They generally support detached garages like we discussed last time. However, the most important kind of factors were that the garage was not on the main frontage, I think, with an attached garage. And in that case, this is true. I also agree with the comments about moving vehicles off of the right-of-way, reducing the traffic congestion, any of those elements having a positive impact on the historic characteristics of the neighborhood. I think a few additional design elements could be added to break up that surface, like perhaps a kind of a small pergola type of element just above the garage door to kind of separate it and hide it underneath a little bit more from the main mass or side of the house there. But I think that there's enough justification given the site and the factors to justify approving with the removal of that condition.
For sake of the entity that provides further direction to future applicants, we know that the design guidelines say that attached garages are meant to be avoided. And so if you are going to approve something with attached garage, I just wanted to summarize why so we can articulate to future people. And
You're not setting a precedent.
we want to have really clear direction here so we're not flip-flopping. Last time we had done an attached garage in a case that was very steep, excessively steep, and there was a stream cutting through the very middle of the site. And it was not supposed to be visible from the right-of-way, although we heard at the last meeting that, I don't know if that would have been the same decision again. And so I wanted to really articulate why, because the design guidelines don't grant you a garage, right? You don't have to have a garage. And parking off-street or on-street, you don't need a garage. And so I heard that the site is steep. We know that there are a lot of steep sites in Kenema. So what else is different about this? We talked last hearing a lot about the visibility of the garage, and it is kind of perched up there, and we did talk about it being kind of visible or pretty visible. So can you further tease out some guidance for us as to why this is different?
Sure.
Is that okay? Thank you.
Okay. The bottom line on putting the garage where it is based on the geographical and indeed, I think, geological site constraints. It is very steep. Most of the site is very steep. There's a relatively small buildable area on the property, and by putting the garage where it is, it minimizes the disturbance of the site through excavation, and it is not visible from 4th Avenue. at all, you would have to go up the Ganong right-of-way to actually see the garage, which is something that makes it different from the concern that Derek expressed regarding the house currently under construction, which I would also point out has not been given its final grading, which will facilitate some concealment there, nor has the landscaping been done, which will also provide concealment. So I don't think that the concerns expressed about that property can really be valid until that property is finished. Then as far as this property is concerned, the only real visual impact from the main right-of-way that the garage underneath has is the elevation of the main floor. And given, I don't know how, do you know how much elevation difference there is between the road?
Maybe you can ask Trevor.
Oh, yep. What is the elevation difference between the road and the
base of the home?
Yeah, the garage floor or the.
No, that's it's quite a ways.
Yeah, that's the way I feel when I look at it
5
from
feet,
there.
I believe. Yeah, 5, 8 feet, somewhere in there. 8 feet.
Maybe Trevor can restate so we don't have people talking from the audience.
Okay.
Or
Yeah.
you can bring back the applicant.
Answer specific questions.
Do you have anything to add regarding that,
So
Grant?
attached garages are okay if they're not on the primary facade on very, very steep slopes when they're not visible, maybe? I know they're all case by case basis, but we want to really tease out why this is different.
I feel like because it's also not on the main level of the home, I feel like it doesn't detract from the design of the main structure.
No, this is very helpful for our findings.
Claire? You are deep in thought.
Yeah, because this is where the garage is. It's right there, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So can this, this is going to be enclosed underneath the porch?
You're talking
Correct.
about this area right here?
Yes, that's going to be screened.
Yeah.
There's
with,
other
like
screening.
with,
It's like a
yeah. So
like a
could
lens.
that possibly? Oh, that would look funny. I was going to say continue out on.
On the site plan.
Yeah.
So, one of the an effective item I would say used for maybe screening additional massing is the requirements of like landscaping. Would that
Landscaping
work
too,
as something that as to kind of achieve the goal you're looking for? If that's
And there are 2 large trees being retained at the corner of the lot, which effectively provide a visual
Some screening
barrier
and stuff,
there.
yeah. I think that's. Tend to agree with you guys, as long as it's somehow you're going to have a driveway going up there, so it's going to be. That it's not going to nowhere. So.
Okay.
So remove condition number.
Move for subject to the conditions stated with the exception of number one.
One, under the certificate of occupancy, because they have two separate. Prior to the issue of of a certificate of
yes.
occupancy, that number one be removed. As
Did it-
long as there's good enough, you feel like you have good enough findings as far as a precedent.
I can read back what we have so far, if you would like me to.
Please.
So, getting into it, so findings in, again, clearing traffic from the street. The garage would not be on the main frontage of the home. It's located on the side of the home. It's a steep site that, due to the natural state of, or the nature of the site, there's significant elevation from the road to the site that kind of removes it from that street level view. Again, it have little visibility because of the landscaping that's there and the steepness of the site from 4th Avenue. You stated that it's more visible from the Ganong right-of-way, and again, not visible from the 4th right-of-way, and that the site is set back further, or the home is set back further on the site than most homes that would be proposed in this area are. The main ones that I've come up with setback.
I'd also add that the garage is not on the main level of the home.
Not the main level.
So moved.
Second?
With those, yep.
So we'd like to come back to the revised staff report?
Yes.
So we'd be coming back to the revised staff report at the June hearing to reflect. So again, we have a difference of a staff report and the decision. So the record is closed, like in all of the cases, the record's closed, so we'd be coming back. So I realize it's kind of the same thing as this meeting, but the records are closed, so it's just the adoption of the staff report.
No, it's not adoption of a staff
Or-
report, it's an adoption of a written decision that reflects the deliberation that we've heard today.
In the because of building times in Oregon, if we're having are we having another meeting in a?
I don't think we need
don't
to,
need.
no.
No, never mind. Erase. I was just trying to speed it up some.
So, could you restate your motion?
I move
motion.
that we approve HRB 1701 with the recommendation conditions of approval for the building permits and removing number one off of the prior to the issuance of a certificate of occupancy with the conditions that Trevor just listed.
For the reasons.
Right, as findings.
Yes, the findings that I stated.
Right.
Yes.
Second.
Did that make sense?
Great. All right. So, motion second. Board Member Met.
Aye.
Board Member Blythe.
Aye.
And Interim Chair Basinger.
Aye.
Great. So that is a condition to approval based upon removing item number one underneath the certificate of occupancy and adopting the findings the HRB has discussed here tonight.
That is correct.
Perfect.
What about the memo?
One final item here is the memo regarding the grant.
Just a quick.
Communications?
Yeah. Yes. There's one quick memo here.
Wherever it went.
If I can find it in my stack of stuff.
There it is.
Oh, did we
Would
actually
you-
get a printed copy?
Yes, you should have a printed copy.
Oh.
This is,
Just look at my.
So that is a memo from the HRB to, there it is, the Metro Enhancement Committee for a grant that would go towards fixing some of the concrete caps along the McLaughlin Promenade. And this would be a supporting letter to the Metro Enhancement Committee, reflecting that you support the grant opportunity and using that money for enhancing the promenade.
Shall I read it? The McLaughlin Promenade is a historic treasure which provides. I think we need to edit that.
Sure.
Which provides an opportunity for the public to experience our locally designated treasure while taking in breathtaking views, observing our natural resources, exercising, or a place for a relaxing picnic. It is critical that the community continue to support our historic resources and allow a variety of opportunities for the public to engage in historic structures. Engage with historic structures, of course. I'm having a hard time. The Historic Review Board would like to express our full support for the City of Oregon City's Enhancement Grant application for replacement of 51 wall caps along the McLaughlin Promenade. The project will allow the promenade to serve the public and the region long into the future. We encourage your approval and full support of this grant request.
I move to send the memo as read with the typo revised.
I second it.
Board Member Met?
Aye.
Board Member Blythe?
Aye.
And Interim Chair Basinger?
Aye.
Okay. Great. We will get that out.
And with that, we are finished, and this meeting is adjourned.
Only an hour
But I
late.
do want to thank the Assistant City Attorney, Carrie Richter, for being here. Your help has been priceless.
Happy to do it.